our next insert, we take a more in-depth look at these cattle from a conservation angle, of course.
2 fine young giraffes were imported to Swaziland. They grew up and mated. The bull was unfortunately killed when he walked into a fallen high-tension wire. But the cow lived on to produce a bull calf. Grew up and covered his mother to produce his sister, daughter. And soon this female bore a heifer that grew up to be covered by her father, come brother, and so on. This was inbreeding and incest at its worst. Years later, I visited Swaziland again. Now there was a whole herd of giraffe, all related to the original pair. Yet we could see no visible defect in any of the animals. Obviously, this inbreeding has put these giraffe through an extremely stressful period, but they survived. It's claimed that they survived as well as they did because the original pair was the product of natural selection. We're all familiar with the phrase, survival of the fittest. Whether it's cunning, speed, strength, or camouflage, fittest means the ability to survive. Now, nature is constantly weeding out the weak, the sick, those susceptible to disease. And this is the essence of natural selection. Sometimes the criteria for survival are obvious. Size, for example, as with an elephant, or the camouflage of an insect. But many of the most positive attributes are lost in the diversity of the gene pool of the species. A rhinoceros, for example, is more than what you just see standing there. It's the sum of its entire genetic history. Natural selection over the years has worked towards providing the best possible chance of that animal's survival. Very few breeds of domestic animals would be healthy if they went through what the giraffe went through. Very few would live out a week in a game reserve. There are no vets, no drugs, no medicine, no help or interference. Only survivors live on to breed survivors. This is the way of the wild. I've spent some time with a group of Nguni cattle breeders who believe that nature still has a tremendous amount to teach man before he tries to take over the whole selection process. And they prepare to argue not only on aesthetic and moral principles, but also in hard, no-nonsense economic terms. About 600 years ago, in Europe, man interfered with natural selection by imposing his own selective criteria. These so-called master stockmen bred their beef cattle to be big and to be of uniform color. Now, at more or less the same time, the African Sangha cattle were coming down the east coast of Africa, in terrain pretty similar to this, which is arguably the most disease-ridden cattle area in the world. Now, these cattle, under tribal ownership, were still subject to high levels of natural selection, and they were small and multicolored. They were distinct from the European Bos Taurus cattle and the Bos Indicus of India. They were, and are today, truly African animals. As they moved through the tropical and the subtropical regions, they had to cope with lions, leopards, and hyenas. One branch of the Sangha, the Nguni cattle, ended up wherever the Nguni tribes settled. With an immune system strengthened by 1,000 years of new diseases, they must be the hardiest and most salted cattle there are. For cattlemen, resistance to disease is only one of several characteristics that beef cattle should have. But the Nguni breeders claim that because they were subject to natural selection, they outperform exotic breeds in all areas of production. I approached 2 farmers, Mr. Ted Riley, who runs his cattle in a nature reserve where the grass is exceptionally nutritious, and Mr. Barry Leach, whose farm on the border of KwaZulu has sour grass, making it a very poor area for cattle. I mean, what do you mean specifically when you refer to...
All right, we're looking at it again.
Barry had some difficulty talking down to a layman. I didn't even know what an Nguni was supposed to look like.
And the symmetrical skin, that's very, very typical of
Barry,
your...
if you took, say, an Afrikaner and a Friesland and a Brahmin and threw them all together.
Yes.
Would you be able to tell the difference between that offspring and one of these?
Well, most Nguni breeders will shoot you, but I won't. I'll be a little bit more lenient. Well, I'll tell you where you tell the difference. You bring them here, besides the color and besides the performance and besides the fertility and everything else that the Nguni's got, you tell the difference because right now as we're going into winter, you'd certainly tell the difference. Those animals wouldn't keep their condition on this veld. This is very, very harsh veld. It's mostly sour. It's extremely mountainous, and those animals simply would not perform the same as an Nguni. I run nothing else here seriously than Ngunis. I've got commercials, but I'm busy phasing them out as fast as I can because they cannot match.
But you keep telling us that the conditions are harsh.
Yes.
But these cattle look in incredibly good condition.
That's because they're Ngunis.
Is that as simple as that?
It's simple as that.
Are you telling me that if we brought in anything else, an Afrikaner, a Brahmin, and put them in the same environment, they would look ragged compared to these?
I can show them to you. I can show them on the same farm. I can show you commercials that are looking like hat racks already.
What Barry had said was borne out by what we'd seen earlier of Nguni cattle. They've learned to fend for themselves when times are hard and get their nutrition from leaves or berries or even bark. Ted Riley was the first person ever to register Nguni cattle as a breed. His first herd was carefully chosen to be as pure as possible.
We did select heavily for color in the beginning on the basis that you get black Ngunis, but you also get black Drakensbergers. You get red Ngunis, but you also get red Afrikaners. But as you see some of these traditional colors among the Nguni, those colorations are peculiar to the Nguni, totally, and they don't occur in other cattle. As our whole aim was at purity, we're great believers in purity, we deduced that by selecting for colors, we were selecting for a peculiarity of the Nguni. So this did weigh heavily in our selection in the beginning. And quite providentially, it's been an economic selection because the colors are what people go for today. They pay more money for colors.
The lyre-shaped horns and these small drops of color are, to me, what most characterizes Ngunis.
One can't deny it. The more dramatic the color, the more finely colored an animal, the bigger the price on its head. Fanciers, collectors like the color in an animal. And it's as simple as that. It's important. The color of an animal is important because aesthetics are part of what a person buys the animal for.
And to you personally?
Absolutely. I mean, I like the animal so much in their natural form that I don't even dehorn, although I do use it as a purity index as well, but I don't like dehorning. I don't like defacing the animals in any way. I don't like clipping the ears even.
Aesthetics isn't easily measured, so I'll leave it to you to decide for yourself as to what is visually pleasing. What is amazing, though, is that the early settlers from Europe saw the cattle as not only unsightly, but also as so inferior that they weren't worth keeping. With misguided paternalism, they got most of the local people to cross this pure breed with their exotic imports. Much more than 1,000 years of natural selection was nearly wiped out. And these preconceived ideas of our indigenous cattle have lasted right up to modern times. A blindness so complete that it took commercial farmers over 100 years to recognize that Ngunis were a breed in their own right. One valid observation is that the Ngunis are small, but they haven't been bred for size. Nguni breeders contend that master stockmen, who bred almost exclusively for bulk, have in doing so sacrificed a myriad of strong, healthy traits. For instance, traditionally, the Nguni people ran more than one bull with their cows. Natural selection, then, favors the sperm of the most fertile bull. In breeding for size, exotic cattle breeders have always limited their cows to a single large bull. The choice was taken away from natural selection, and this is why, it's said, the Ngunis perform better overall. And, say the Nguni breeders, it's not the size of the animal that's important, but the beef a farmer gets from a given hectare. Nguni cattle eat less, and therefore a farmer can keep more Ngunis on the same bit of land. It's how well cattle convert food, grazing, into meat that's the crux of beef production.
When we prepare our commercial cattle and Brahmins for a sale, it takes 6 weeks to put condition on them with high concentrate food. In 3 weeks, the Ngunis we have to take out because they're already looking too gross. They're looking over fat, and that's also not a good thing. So the food conversion is excellent.
I was with Ted at a waterhole waiting for the cattle you just saw to arrive. It brought to mind that most of the financing of this nature reserve comes directly from the economic success he's had with Nguni cattle. Sitting quietly and watching these animals, I could see how Ted developed his faith in natural behavior patterns. A small herd of rhinos seldom reproduce if there's only one bull in the herd, but introduce a second bull, and it seems to excite the first male into action. These impala does, for instance, will have the attention of any number of eager buck, all trying to outdo each other in strength and virility, and it's like that with most animals. The only cattle which have traditionally been run with multi-sire herds are the Ngunis. Barry Leach described how natural selection fitted in.
Multi-sire means that you allow several sires to run with a group of cows, so that when a cow comes into estrus, she actually might have up to 5 or 10 sires covering her during that time. And that means that the most virulent of the semen actually gets through and does the final fertilization process. And we believe that that translates directly into high fertility in the female. And you've allowed nature to put in a broad range of semen, and then the best semen actually does the fertilization. And in our opinion, that's very, very important, because it's the same as happens in the wildlife situation. You're allowing nature to bring forward the best properties in the animal.
So what is the argument against that? Why are the people who go for selective breeding so adamant?
Okay, there's several arguments against it. The argument, for example, is if you get a bull that's very well beefed and you work only on him, you're going to obviously get far better beefing through all his progeny, and you're then selecting positively for certain criteria. But in so doing, you are possibly selecting negatively for other criteria that can come out as negatives.
By this time, I knew that Barry had only one bull in his herd, which seemed like selective breeding to me.
One has to be in terms of the South African stud book, because if you wanted to get stud prices for your animals, you have to go through the formulas which they've laid down.
So it's purely a financial economic thing?
Yes, because if it was left up to me, there's no doubt that I would run my animals with a multi-sire situation, as happens naturally, and I would allow nature to play a far bigger role in the mating process.
The cattle had arrived at the waterhole in Ted Riley's reserve. They remained impatiently in the background, while the bigger animals took turns in the mud. I saw a rhino try to warn off the elephants, and wondered how accommodating these big animals are with the cattle. Ted, why do you run wildlife and cattle together?
Well, if you think about it, what's being reenacted here is scenes out of 1,000 years ago, when the Nguni cattle, the Swazis, game of all varieties, shared a common habitat.
Do they coexist quite happily?
Oh yes, they share the same waterhole, they share the same pastures, they all have a pecking order, and they respect each other, and they keep an individual distance, but they certainly cohabit, and they do so quite happily.
The cattle must be in some danger from predators.
Yes, they do occasionally fall victim to predators. Crocodiles take calves and even big cattle. Hyenas attempt to take calves and even big cattle as well. But the Ngunis are still with us, and so are the predators, and we don't overreact to it.
My next assumption was, if cattle were this wild for so long, wouldn't their meat be too tough?
The carcass quality is very good. It's fine meat, and the butchers like it, and the meat is tasty, so I think it's pretty good.
As I promised earlier on, we took our question about these cattle to an independent animal scientist.
Although not studied in detail, the Nguni seems to have a very high carcass quality. And by that I refer to tenderness, juiciness and flavor.
There's certainly a dreamy Garden of Eden tranquility about Ted Riley's reserve. But it's clear answers to economic questions we need. If I wanted to buy cattle, would I be able to say this cow is more cost productive than any other cow?
You refer to Ngunis.
I refer to
Yes, Ngunis are more productive than other breeds, and I would like to illustrate it in this table. If we look at the first columns here, the one with the 100 on top, that refers to the kilograms of calf weaned for every 100 kilograms of cows that were available for mating. And if we look at this, we can see the Nguni will produce 36 kilograms, which is the highest of all the beef breeds in South Africa. But there are other breeds, such as the Angus and the Bonsmara, that also produce nearly 36 kilograms of calf. So yes, the Nguni is the most productive breed in South Africa, but the difference is not as big as some people might claim.
We've established that the Ngunis are cost effective. We believe that it's because there's a large measure of natural selection. Yet Ted Riley runs two herds. This herd with a single bull. He says it's because he needs a stud book F rating. F ratings are a sort of pedigree that go towards getting him a good price for his cows. But you're such a strong advocate of natural selection. What you've just told me seems to go completely against that.
I can show you cattle equally spectacular in our do or die herd, which is one which we've sacrificed F ratings for, and we run it with multiple sire bulls.
This means bulls compete with each other and fertility increases. Sick animals or tick-infested ones are taken out, leaving only those with a strong resistance to disease. Cows have to protect their calves against predators. Only the calves of those with strong mothering instincts survive. All in all, it's a pretty accurate recreation of natural selection. In the long term, if this artificial selection continues, aren't we going to see everything that you believe the Nguni stands for slowly bred away and go into demise?
I believe that's going to happen. I really do. I can't help asking this question. Why, after so many centuries of livestock improvement and scientific research, is the Nguni, which hasn't enjoyed that attention by man, outperforming by far the Brahmins and the other developed breeds that we have, which have had the advantage of scientific research and man's improvement or perhaps interference, whichever way you want to look at it. I don't think natural selection has been given the attention it deserves. I think the man who really understood natural selection was Darwin, and I think it's time that his theories were looked at in breeding circles.
I'm not against natural selection, and in fact our institute has got 2 research projects with beef breeds in which we investigate the effect of the simulation of natural selection. If we know the effect of natural selection and how it works, we can apply modern technology to make the process much quicker by artificially selecting for fertility in the right manner.
But Nguni breeders go further. They say that if their cattle can flourish here, well, then they can survive absolutely anywhere. And to support their argument, they point out that their cattle have been exported as far afield as West Africa. And there, by the way, they are being recognized for the great potential they have in their genes.